War is often described through images: trenches, barbed wire, ruined villages, and silhouettes against a gray horizon. But World War I was not only seen, it was heard. It was a war of thunder and trembling earth, of whispered orders and exploding steel, of the constant struggle between noise that shattered nerves and silence that suffocated imagination. The Great War unfolded on a battlefield of sound, a landscape shaped as much by explosions, echoes, distant engines, and suppressed breaths as by mud and machinery. Noise became a weapon, an environmental force, and a psychological companion that soldiers could neither escape nor fully understand. Silence, too, carved its own trenches, in moments before attacks, in ceasefires at dawn, and in the fragile pauses between bombardments. This is the story of the acoustic life of the First World War, how sound shaped fear, memory, strategy, and survival, and how silence formed a second battlefield just as vast as the physical one. The opening days of the war carried a strange kind of noise. Parades, brass bands, horses' hooves on cobblestones, train whistles, marching boots, shouted farewells. It was sound filled with hope and ignorance. Crowds cheered as men departed, unaware that the next 4 years would transform the very meaning of sound itself. For many soldiers, the last familiar noises were the clatter of a station platform, the creak of a wooden carriage, the gentle hum of summer insects, and the indistinct murmur of a crowd wishing them well. As trains rolled toward the front, the soundscape shifted. Forests muffled the rails. Distant drums of artillery hinted at the future. By the time soldiers reached their staging grounds, normal sound had already begun to retreat. The war replaced it with something alien. Artillery was the dominant sound of the Great War. Guns miles behind the lines unleashed such force that the air shook. The ground quivered, and bodies absorbed the concussive wave before understanding it. A single barrage could strip leaves from trees, collapse dugouts, disorient men even when shells landed far away, and create a constant thunder that filled every thought. The front lines were not simply dangerous. They were loud in a way that seemed to rewrite reality. The earth became a drum, and the sky its echo chamber. In winter, explosions were muffled by snow, yet sharpened by cold air. In summer, heat carried sound over miles until towns far from the front trembled with distant thunder that never brought rain. Night magnified everything, every shell, flare, footstep, and whispered command. Artillery created a world where sound was both prophecy and terror. Repeated exposure to explosions changed soldiers physically and psychologically. Before the concept of shell shock existed, men described the war as a constant assault on the senses. The shock wave of nearby explosions, distorted hearing, caused temporary deafness, ruptured eardrums, damaged inner ear structures, and produced a persistent ringing that followed men long after battles ended. But even distant barrages inflicted an invisible weight. The brain, constantly braced for impact, adapted too well. It lived in anticipation of noise, flinching at small sounds, failing to relax even in safety. Silence once peaceful, became suspicious. Noise became the new normal. Years later, veterans found thunder, fireworks, and even slamming doors, unbearable reminders of the front. The war had permanently rewired their relationship with sound. Not all sound in the war was overwhelming. Some of it was so subtle, so fragile, that entire strategies depended on men learning to hear the faintest clues. At night, armies created acoustic posts, small, silent observation stations where specially trained soldiers listened for footsteps in no man's land, wire cutting, whispered orders, the grinding of wheels, the clinking of equipment, or digging beneath the earth. Silence was their battlefield. Sound was their weapon. In deep underground tunnels, miners pressed their ears to the soil, listening for enemy teams attempting to plant explosives. A single scrape, tap, or vibration could reveal an entire plan. This was the war where sound replaced sight. As technology advanced, a new symphony joined the battlefield. Machine guns chattered in mechanical rhythms. Supply trucks rattled over broken roads. Aircraft engines roared above the trenches. Tanks growled forward like metal beasts, their treads grinding earth into submission. Each machine had a signature sound. Soldiers learned them quickly. The cough of a faulty truck, the whine of a fighter approaching a dive, the low hum of a bomber at night, the screech of brakes on a supply convoy, the metallic echo of tank armor trembling under fire. Machines gave war its industrial accent. The arrival of chemical weapons introduced new acoustic rituals. Gas alarms filled the trenches, handbells ringing urgently, wooden clappers snapping through the air, gongs struck with frantic force. Masks had to be donned in seconds. The difference between survival and death. The sound of gas warnings became one of the most dreaded noises of the war. Later, soldiers described that the bells never truly left them. Even decades afterward, a sudden clang could summon memories sharper than photographs. Paradoxically, the most frightening moments on the Western Front were often those when nothing happened. Silence meant an attack might be imminent. Enemy troops might be moving unseen. Artillery might be repositioning. Or sappers might be tunneling below. Silence created an unbearable tension. The held breath before a storm. The absence of noise was not peaceful. It was suspense sharp enough to cut. Even in ceasefires, silence felt temporary, fragile, ready to burst. Soldiers described it as standing in the eye of a hurricane, still air surrounded by walls of violence. War also changed the sound of civilian life. Cities far from the front heard sirens, Zeppelin engines overhead, anti-aircraft guns firing into the night. Families listened anxiously to radio broadcasts, church bells chiming news, and the footsteps of telegram messengers, each step a potential tragedy. Refugee columns produced their own somber rhythm, wheels creaking, children crying, animals braying, and towns falling quiet as populations fled. Sound united soldiers and civilians, reminding both that the war reached into every home and every season. On November 11, 1918, at 11 a.m., something extraordinary happened. Silence. A silence so total, so sudden, so unnatural that soldiers wept. Birdsong returned to places where none had been heard for years. Wind moved through grass instead of smoke. The world seemed to inhale for the first time since 1914. Men who had adapted to constant thunder found the quiet overwhelming. Some felt relief. Some felt emptiness. Some felt fear, unsure how to live without noise. The end of the war was not marked by the last shot fired, but by the first moment of profound, unbroken silence. Veterans remembered the war through sound more than sight. Some recalled the crescendo of a barrage, the metallic scream of shells overhead, the soft crunch of boots in frost, the dull roar of distant fighting, the quiet sobbing of a comrade in the dark, the sudden ringing in the ears that meant a shell had landed too close, the eerie calm after a night of explosions. Sound-shaped trauma, sound-shaped healing, sound-shaped history. A century later, the battlefields of World War I are quiet, grass-covered, still, almost gentle. But visitors often describe an uncanny feeling, as if the silence itself holds memory. It is the silence after thunder. The silence that once meant danger. The silence that soldiers prayed for and feared. In that quiet, the echoes of the Great War remain, not as ghosts, but as reminders that the conflict was not only fought with arms and trenches, but with the very air itself. The soundscape of the First World War shaped the bodies and minds of millions. And in every whisper of wind across an old battlefield, the past still resonates.